Okay, thank you very much for joining me this evening. I'm here with Chris Jones from Twisted 50, aka Create 50. I've also got a couple of my lovely bangers up in the gallery as well. I don't know if you can see them or not. I don't think so, but hello to you anyway. So Chris, writing horror. We're talking about Twisted 50. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that actually is for anybody at home who's going, what the hell is that?
Sure. So I'll just give you a little bit of context about me as well, because that will help you understand the kind of nature of Twisted 50. So I'm a filmmaker and a reluctant screenwriter myself. I began at the tender age of something teen, I probably 17, making Super 8 zombie horror movies, and then went to film school, made some movies. I made a horror movie in the 90s called Urban Ghost Story. But then I pivoted into the London Screenwriters Festival. And at the festival, we've always taken a stand for helping platform talent, particularly new talent. And we quickly became aware that there's this real challenge in people getting their very first credit. And so we ran a competition in 2011, I think it was, or 10, I can't remember. It was when we had the London riots. And out of the riots, after the riots, we thought, why don't we have people write one-page scripts about the riots, and then we'll release the best scripts on the internet, and people can make those films, and basically find a way to connect writers with new filmmakers. And it was incredibly successful, and we got something like 50 or 60 short films made out of that. So we then thought, oh, this works. Why don't we formalize it into something structured that kind of feels right? And that's how Create 50 came about, which was simply write a script. We'll select the best 50. We'll put those scripts on the internet. Any filmmaker can download the script, make a film, a short film. We'll take the 50 best short films and we'll make a feature film. We'll release it in cinemas. And we made a film called 50 Kisses doing that. We've subsequently made another one called Impact 50 about an asteroid impact on the Earth. But we also decided to do the same with fiction, writing novels. And the first book was Twisted 50 and is a collection of 50 short horror stories, inspired, I think, from like 1980s books like Pound's Books of Horror, as well as shows like Hammer House of Horrors, but also updated to be contemporary. And it was an opportunity for people who wanted to write a short story under 2,000 words within the horror genre with some very, very broad, guide rails. So it's like we said, we can't have aliens. I mean, I suspect you probably could have aliens, but we didn't want them to take place on other planets. And the first book was a huge success, which led to the second book and has now led to the third book. And there's been two other spin-off books. We did one in the pandemic with Christmas horror stories. And we also did a spin-off one called Twisted's Evil Little Sister. When we got so many good stories with Twisted Volume 1, we had a spillover of about 25 stories, and we just wanted to put them into another book. So we just created this secondary book called Evil Little Sister, the demented sibling to Twisted. We decided to run it again earlier this year because it's really a community project to help get people published. And the beauty of Create 50 is it's such a low bar to entry because everybody can write a story under 2,000 words. And I hasten to add, some people are submitting stories that are 200 words long, and I fully endorse that. So if you can write, you can write to submit, and I strongly recommend that you do get involved because there's not that many in the community. There's a vibrant community now of people reading, reviewing, and offering feedback. That's hard baked into the concept that if you submit, in order to be eligible, you have to read and review two other stories and offer feedback. And when you get feedback, you have the opportunity to submit a second draft after you've read feedback on your story. So it's a really cool way to have a crack at being published. We'll have a huge launch party, which is going to be around Halloween this year, and the kind of collection of writers involved. If we have 50 separate writers, that's potentially 50 social media footprints and accounts that can all be amplifying the book, encouraging relatives and friends to buy the book on the same day, which means in reality we should get to the horror #1 on the day of release. It's all tactical. It's all a way of gaming the system. But that means if you're in the book, you're an Amazon #1 bestseller. So there's so much upside. You get published, it can go on your resume, you get the experience of doing it, you get the experience of reading other people's work and being active in the feedback for making their work better. You get to come to an amazing launch party. You can bring your mum and dad, brother, sister, kids, if they're old enough, because they may be traumatized. And you should, in theory, get into it should be a horror Amazon bestseller. So all of that is available for just participating, really. Plus, you get to write a horror story, which is amazingly cool because we all love horror. I know some people don't, but I don't understand that because I love horror and always have. And as you all know, Lucy is demented, so we're in good company.
Yeah, I can't deny it. Yeah, I'm certainly a little bit have a few screws loose. That's certainly true. And obviously, as well as a script editor, I'm obviously a novelist as well, and I love the short story as a form. I think it's fantastic. I think it's something that's, like you say, anyone can write a short story, and one thing that I work with my one-to-one clients in particular is, especially if they find it really hard to finish things, really, really tough. There's a lot of people out there, they're writing screenplays, they're writing novels, they've been doing it for years, they've never got to the end of it. And so one thing I'll often do with my clients is say, let's write some short stories. Let's see if you can write a whole bunch of them. Let's try and write a short story every month, with some of my long termers. Let's write one every month for a year, and then you've got 12, and then you've got your own volume. And a lot of them have really got behind this, and I think that's why I'm quite drawn to short story competitions, because they can give the deadline, and they often have great great kind of outcomes for people. There's like getting in a book, for instance, and going to launch parties and doing all those kind of things, networking with their peers, networking with industry pros. So I think that Twisted 50 is a really great thing for that. And it's also maybe a little bit of a cut above the average short story competition, because of course, like you say, you're supposed to give feedback on other people's work, and I think that's really effective, because the average writer out there doesn't know enough about feedback. That's one of the reasons we obviously do the script reading course, you and I, Chris, because even writers who don't want to be script readers, learning how feedback actually works is so effective to your own craft as well. So I really like that about Twisted 50. I mean, let's talk about feedback for a moment. You're supposed to read 2 stories, is that right?
That's correct. I mean, most people end up reading a lot more because they figure out that they're improving their own craft by being forced or forcing themselves to like offer insight, credible insight, and not just I didn't like it, but offer ways to improve it. So I do think it does have a direct impact on your own writing. And then, of course, you can go and rewrite your own stuff and resubmit it. So it's a process. We've always called these not competitions, but initiatives and processes, because it's a much better way to frame what you're actually going to get out of it. Effectively, if you participate, you're gonna win. You may win in just the experience game, but it's not just like putting a stamp on it into the post and then waiting for a reply to see whether you won or not.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's transparency as well.
Yeah.
And when writers can see how the process is going and how people get picked and how we can make our stories better, but also understand how feedback works as well. Because I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of writers out there that, maybe haven't been taught how to do that. If you haven't done English literature at school, or you haven't got a degree in it and things like that, then maybe you've never been taught the process of feedback. And so actually seeing how it works from the inside in this transparent way is really effective, I think, as well. And that's why I've often say to my script readers as well, it's like, if you want to get, experience giving other people feedback in a transparent way, then something like Twisted 50, Create 50 can be really, really effective to help you kind of get connected with people and actually work on your craft as a script reader as well. So, there's multiple ways that we can kind of, approach this. Okay, so
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well. One of the beauties of the whole Create 50 philosophy is that when you say you have to leave feedback, you're leaving feedback on a 3-page story. Like, you can literally read it in the time it takes to drink your tea. And so these are very, very small time slices of commitment. As opposed to, like, here, read my feature script, or here, read my novel, and you go, blimey, there goes a day. This is measured in minutes, and often under 10 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think I was on a business course recently, and they talked about micro commitments and how those can be more effective than, doing big analysis and stuff like that. So, and I kind of feel that's something that we can do here, these micro commitments to reading one story, giving, 3 or 4 sentences of high quality feedback. That can be really effective in taking your craft and your understanding to the next level, for sure. So when it comes to horror, why did you choose horror, Chris? What was the kind of appeal there?
Well, I think I was very inspired by the books that came out of the 80s, the Pam's books of horror. I think the very first grown-up books I ever read, of James Herbert books. And for those listening to this in America later, that he's kind of like the English Stephen King of an era. And I kind of wanted to invoke that. I also loved Hammer House of Horror, Tales of the Unexpected, all those kind of late 70s, early 80s shows that do not go back and watch now. You'll be horrified. But it's how it made me feel. I love that. I also just, because along with it was going to be book covers and a website. And I just love the imagery with horror. And I wanted there to be, a lot of really cool imagery. I wanted people to feel it was more than just, I think if I was to level a complaint at writers in general and writing competitions, is there's a huge amount of emphasis on the language, the words, almost to the at some points complete disregard for any visual aesthetics. And I'm a filmmaker first and foremost, and I write begrudgingly, and I probably don't write particularly well. But I wanted what we did to be aesthetically pleasing and to look like it belonged in the marketplace, like very, very, very professional. And that's worked really well. We've, before the pandemic, we were in talks with a sales agent who really wanted us to make Twisted 50 the movie, and that was based on the website and the community engagement. The fact that hundreds, if not thousands, of people were engaged with this. They could see that it was working, and it looked cool, and it was on brand, it was on genre, it knew what it was. So that was another very important part for me, and one of the reasons why I chose horror over, say, drama. Like, I wouldn't really know how to make a cool website out of drama. We could definitely do. I mean, funnily enough, Gail Haxton, who was involved years ago, reminded me in 2020 that, believe it or not, we got within, I don't know, one round of funding to make in 2018 Pandemic 50 with the Wellcome Trust.
Oh,
And that was going to happen, and then they just didn't go for it at the final round, and that would have been fully funded. So we had other things, we've talked about Erotica 50, because that's another one where, the visuals would be really cool. But, Thriller 50, I don't know how we could, how can you write a thriller in under 2,000 words? That's a challenge. I'm sure it's possible.
Hmm.
But inevitably, I think it would start leaning into horror-y kind of territory anyway. So yes, there are other genres that we could do, but I love horror. It was my first love, and I just wanted to go back there. And I've enjoyed every moment of it. And I know the people involved really love it. Like they really love the genre. So, that's all I need.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Yeah, something like thriller or romance in 2,000 words, it is more kind of challenging than horror. Horror, you need that horrifying thing, that voyeuristic thing, and then that way it could be like a whole arc for a character, for example, or equally it can just be a snapshot, horrifying, disgusting moment as well. So it kind of covers all the bases, really, horror, and it's probably one of the reasons that when I think about my own short stories, probably the vast majority of them are horror. I think one of the last ones was this one that I was involved in, Terror Tales of the West Country, and a variety of other ones, including some erotica horror as well. Because why only do horror when you can do erotica as well?
I fully
uh,
endorse that.
only me. Well, I would say only me, but actually, it's an entire subgenre on Amazon. So that's that often surprises people. So yeah, I think in terms of showcasing new talents as well, getting that credit, getting if you're feeling like really frustrated about not getting anywhere in your writing career and not getting that credit, then getting on into an anthology on Amazon is a great place to start. It's very validating, and also means that you can write to a brief as well, which I think is underestimated.
Yeah, and you get to come to the awards and stand on a red carpet, get your photo taken. All of that's hard baked into the proposition, and we live in a visually social media world where you want to put as much cool stuff about yourself out there, and that again it's kind of everything we do around Create 50 is about like professional development of our community, and platforming the community. Like we got into the Guinness Book of Records with 50 Kisses before they were taken over. They were bought by another company apparently, and now you have to pay exorbitant amount of monies to have a record verified. But back then we got verified and we thought, brilliant, let's just go for that. So we got in the Guinness Book of Records. So all of those 50 writers on 50 Kisses are Guinness World Record holders. I guarantee none of them thought about that, in the 45 minutes it might have taken them to write the first draft of their 2-page script. So, that is very low barrier to entry and loads of potential upside.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of bangers at the top. Gentlemen, do you have any questions for Chris? Because you can ask him if you want, or I can come back to you in just a moment.
Would you advise? I mean, I think you would advise getting the last two copies. I just went on Amazon now and saw them on there, to have a kind of an idea of what they're kind of looking for, and I think with those stories being selected, would it help us to see the kind of idea that you're going for, or has it changed of what you're looking for, because the last ones were quite a while ago?
Well, first of all, yes. I would say yes. Buy the books if you can. If you got a Prime account or whatever, the Kindle account, unlimited, then you don't even have to buy it, because that the Screenwriters Festival will then get 7p or whatever it is. As for reading them in order to see what we're looking for, we're not looking for anything other than a great story, well told. That's it. So I would unleash your imagination. Like I said, the brief is broad. It kind of has to be set, like it can't be set in 18th century England or on other planets. But that's kind of it, really. And I would just write write. My advice is always the same: is like write as though nobody's ever going to read it. And I don't mean that because nobody wants to read it. I mean that like people might never talk to you again or want you to go to prison if they read it. And just don't hold back. Because when again, it's one, particularly in Twisted One, there was halfway through, we were very present to people were like being a little bit nice. And it felt very much like we needed to like give it more teeth. So if I had one piece of advice for this one is I would give it more teeth, but in the imagination area, and not like it doesn't necessarily have to be gory or violent. We seem to have a violent streak running through this cohort, and maybe that's a subconscious reaction to the pandemic. I don't know, but I would be. I mean, well, there's one story from Twisted One that always stuck with me, and it was like 200 words, and it was just about somebody being led to the guillotine, and what they were thinking, and it was absolutely beautifully written and rendered, and you know that sure that should and could inspire you to tell a very, very different story. It doesn't have to be like a kind of episode of the Twilight Zone with monsters or serial killers, or it doesn't have to have a twist in the tale. It just has to be compelling and good prose. And that's another thing I would say is like work on your prose, make it short, work on your prose, and have it evocative, like make us feel something, ideally horror obviously, but it can be quite melancholic as well. Melancholy is another thing that kind of, it's that gothic, loss, love lost, and I don't know how to really describe it. I don't want to be too prescriptive, you see. I don't want to say write this. Yeah, I don't know. That's a bit of a rambling answer. I would have done better had I not had coffee earlier.
Well, I mean, there's lots and lots of obviously resources on Bang to Write in terms of writing horror. Obviously, you're an Academy member, Austin, as well, so you know that we've got more in the Academy as well. I think one thing that I would encourage people to have a good look at in their stuff is the passive voice. The passive voice is something that can really kill off your prose. So as Chris was saying earlier, prose is really important in the short story, and it's got to be vital. It's got to really punch people in the face, whether it's melancholic or very gory or very psychological. So if you're sitting at home thinking, what the actual hell is the passive voice? I'm not going to go into it now because it's far too boring. It's a grammar thing. But basically get over, if you Google Bang to Write passive voice, you'll find this article where I actually give you a tiny little tip that will actually help you avoid the passive voice by simply adding the phrase by zombies in any of your, when you're checking through your sentences. And if the sentence makes sense with by zombies, if you shove that in, then it's in the passive voice. So get over to Bang to Write and learn about things, little things like the passive voice, like grammar, punctuation, spelling, blah blah blah. There's loads and loads of help on Bang to Write about that. Okay, so
yeah, I just wanted to add another little tip there. You just reminded me, and it's a tip. It's something I learned when I used to blog 3 or 4 times a week, quite aggressively, and yeah, and like the first few words are so important, and to like, it's almost like you're setting out your table and you're saying, okay, this is the ride you're in for. And as Lucy was just talking, I was like, oh yeah, let me think of an example. So this isn't in any story, and it's literally just entered my head. But if you started a story with, it's strange how human flesh tastes just like pork, like you're immediately like, oh, okay, I know where I'm at, and I know what kind of ride I'm in for. And it's dark and it's disturbing, but it's probably true and authentic and horrible. So have that opening image that is really compelling. And I'm a big fan of mirroring as well. Like you get to the very end, and somehow the very end is incredibly brilliantly linked to the very beginning, not necessarily plot wise, but possibly imagery. And I think that really the short form story really loves a good mirroring, beginning and end kind of come nicely together. I think that makes the story play so much better. But yeah, have a really, really killer opening line.
Absolutely, I would definitely agree with that. A killer opening line, and what you were just picking up on what you were saying there about mirroring. I love what I call the gut punch ending. You know,
Yeah.
where like at the end of The Black Phone by Joe Hill, when he goes, "It's for you."
I haven't seen it yet, so go
No,
on.
no, that's not a short story, not the movie. This is a
Okay.
short story. But in the end of the short story, and he says, "It's for you." And it's like, oh my God, I love it. I love it so much. And I'm also a big fan of Clive Barker, obviously. I love Clive Barker. I loved his Books of Blood. I mean, what are your favorite short stories that kind of jump out at you?
I haven't read a huge amount of literature for horror in a long time, because I think the genre itself hasn't been I mean, that's one of the things we isolated when we did the first Twisted 50 book, was actually it feels like there's loads of these books and they're very familiar and we all know what they are, and then when you go to Amazon, yeah, there's some there, but it's not as many as you think. And I read the Books of Blood. I read a load of M.R. James, H.P. Lovecraft. I tended to read a lot of that kind of like older horror. I'm a big fan of Casting the Runes,
Mhm.
um, which got made as Night of the Demon. I think that's probably my favorite, although I would suggest that the film is much better than the story. Also, I mean, I've said let's not do Aliens, but the original short that the thing was based on,
Mm,
I've forgotten the author's name now,
yeah.
but I loved that one
It
as
was
well.
good.
But I think I have a I've kind of got a retrofit from like movie back to short story.
Mhm.
I love that. And also, actually, my favorite horror short of all time has got to be The Long Walk, Stephen King. I think
Yeah.
it's called The Long Walk.
Mm.
I read that in one sitting, and I immediately wrote to Stephen King to say, "Can I have the rights?" I didn't hear back,
Yeah.
um, but I gave it a go.
Yeah, well, you might as well. And also, doesn't Stephen King offer
Yeah,
almost free rights as well, doesn't he, to his short stories?
yeah, he
I know that
does.
he wrote that in the Tall Grass story with his son Joe, and that was made as a movie recently. That was not great, unfortunately, because it was a great idea. So gross. If you haven't read In the Tall Grass, it makes you twitch. It really does. Horrible. But yeah, going back to horror, I think horror is something that people really love. And it's funny, but they do say that short stories make the best movies, don't they?
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I think there's an inherent efficiency built
Mm,
into it, and of all writing forms, screenwriting is definitely the most efficient. Perhaps haiku is more efficient, um, but in terms of telling a longer story that pop culture will consume, um, screenwriting is where it's at. And I think a great short story tends to have that beginning, middle, and an end in a genre way, not in a maybe big sprawling drama sort of way, but this happens, then this happens, and then this happens kind of way. That 3 act bump. It just lends itself to it, and of course the genre is visual,
mhm,
so it lends itself to film as well. And also it's it's usually based in some kind of magical reality. I mean, even if it's like kitchen sink horror, it's still kind of like outside of almost everybody's experience, so it still lands a bit like magical reality, like that recent Jeffrey Dahmer series on Netflix.
mhm.
At times it was extraordinarily weird, so even when it's a kind of like straight retelling, dramatic reconstruction, it was also a little bit bonkers in place, which is, I think, one of the things we love about horror.
I think you're right. Yeah. I mean, when I think of all the time that I've spent it around people like myself on the psych ward and things like that, all of us loved horror. All of us.
Yeah.
I mean, there were probably more horror books in the library there than anything else when I think about it, actually.
Yeah.
And it's not really hard to see why, because of course life is a horror show as a mentally ill person. And so actually it feels almost reassuring that other people
Yeah.
can see creepy things as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've always loved the way that particularly filmmakers can bring horror to life. I mean, less so now that we're in the digital era, but within the horror genre, you'll find gorehounds who like move heaven and earth to go and watch a splatter movie, particularly if the visual effects are done literally with a syringe, big syringe and a half pint of blood, because there's something magical about that digital effects that modern filmmaking doesn't quite capture. So that massive, like, again, going back to Twisted 50 and the original decision to go into horror and do a horror book, is the fan base is very, very, very dedicated, and they love it and they want more of it. And from your own work, Lucy, the importance of niching down.
Right.
Like if you go broad, like you're in competition with just massive, massive names. But if you niche down, like there's an argument we should really do Twisted 50 the zombies, because that probably might outperform Twisted 50. Because it's niched down. Like the paradox is the smaller the niche, the more you serve a smaller audience, but you're serving all of them. So the Christmas one did very well, and I think is actually our bestseller in the series.
I believe.
So yeah, yeah.
I mean, apparently, according to friends in publishing who write like Christmas rom-coms and stuff like that, apparently they don't sell the best at Christmas. They sell the best in July. How
Right.
amazing is that? And it'll be because people are going on the beach and they're thinking, "Oh, I would love to read a snowy rom-com while I'm on this beach." And there's that contrast there. And I think, maybe sometimes those kind of weird kind of disconnects are what drives people's habits in terms of reading. Like whenever I go off for the summer in August, I'll read a whole bunch of books, and thinking about it, every single summer while I'm relaxing, I'm reading horror, I'm reading crime, I'm reading really high octane stuff while I'm literally just sitting in my hammock in my garden. And so I think we enjoy that disconnect. And it's funny you should say about zombies as well, because I've been having this conversation with God knows how many producers in the last couple of years. Everybody agrees about zombies that they never go away, because you can make them mean anything, because thematically they're very rich, so werewolves come in and out of fashion, vampires come in and out of fashion, but zombies are always there because they were always, they started off as being like thematic for capitalism and false needs and all that other stuff, and you can make them mean anything you want. So zombies, I think, is a great idea for niching down, if that's what's because I think everybody's got a zombie story in them as well. I know I have, and most of us have a favorite zombie movie, I think.
Yeah, and sorry for this in advance, but yes, they never die. And Austin, if you want a subject, write a zombie movie, or write a zombie short story.
Yeah, why not?
I don't know if we've had many zombies in volume 3, but yeah, I would go for it. I know we've got a couple of people in the room, Mark and Amy, who are both involved in the process. I don't know, Mark, whether I can put you on the spot, because I know you've been reading a lot of the stories, but if you had any general feedback not feedback, but pointers for people, or you're looking at me with abject terror now. There we go. He's unmuted, so he's taking the bait.
Yeah, no, I would have just turned the camera off and done a runner otherwise. Yeah, I'm a bit behind. I need to catch up on some of them, but yeah, there's some really good stories there. But I think it's kind of what you were saying. It's the ones that get you the most are the ones that don't follow the norms quite the way. Though, that one you mentioned about, the walk to the guillotine, that's unexpected. You don't necessarily, you expect to see zombies, vampires, monsters, those sorts of things in that horror genre. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think I've read a story where I've thought that was rubbish. I've enjoyed all of them. Some of them work better for me than others. That's just because of my own personal preference for what I like to read. But does seem to be a lot of that sort of monster and, as you say, violence. I mean, I've put one up myself, and it is sort of rooted in violence. That's kind of one of the things that you always sort of go for, that focus on violence, gore, monsters. I love a bit of gore. I'm not going to complain about that. It's I love a bit of violence and a bit of gore in a horror, low budget horror. You can't go wrong with that. But I think that's the thing. Yeah, for me, I think if you can find a way to, what's the expression they say? The same but different.
Mm.
It's getting people in that, comfortable is probably the wrong word for horror as well. You know where you are if you're reading a horror story. Get us comfortable and then pull the rug from underneath us. That's all. Those are always the good horrors to me. You're mentioning zombies. One of my favorite zombies is the original Night of the Living Dead. Without spoiling the ending for anyone, if you want a rug pull, that's the ultimate rug pull.
Mm-hmm.
You get people into a story, into the characters, comfortable, thinking people, how are people going to get out of it? What's going to be the outcome? And then you pull that rug and completely, screw people over. So just it's really easy to sit here, isn't it? So just do the unexpected.
Yeah, just be brilliant.
Yeah, just go and do that now. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, not one off the next level. But it's really good. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have 2 stories published through Twisted 50 Volume 2 and in the Christmas one, and they're both really interesting and enjoyable experiences reading other people's work, getting feedback from other people, even if it's just one sentence to say, I love this story, but you know what, maybe you should have done that with this character, or just, I love this story, it's great, love to see how it will develop. It doesn't have to be reams and reams of feedback. It's about, it's a supportive environment as well. It's just about cheering people on, raising people up, having a bit of fun, and seeing what people are up to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Austin, I saw you asked about giving feedback. That's hard baked into the process. So when you submit a story, you'll be prompted to read feedback and read and offer feedback on other stories. It's kind of like a blog, except it's inside a walled garden. So only people who are in the process can read the scripts or the stories, sorry. And you'll see everybody's feedback on all the different stories. And there's a star rating system as well. We just gamified it, really. The stars don't really mean anything. It just gives us a bit of thrill. Everybody loves getting a 5-star review. And if you are going to buy anything on Amazon, not that I need to make him any richer, and I'm sure you've already read it, but I just reread Stephen King's On Writing. And I think you could definitely, everyone would benefit if they've not read it already from buying it and reading it or listening to the audiobook. I did the audiobook and he gives a great rendition of it. So I would recommend that if you've not already got it.
I always read it when I go away because it kind of like reminds you of things and makes you, every time I read it, there's always something different that I remember or pick up from there. So you can't be, if you're going to be, to be able to be a reader and to give feedback, you have to submit a story.
You don't actually have to submit a story. You just have to join it. Okay. So but in order to submit a story, you have to commit to reading 2 other stories at least.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you.
This is at twistedfifty.com, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you'll see big buttons saying join or submit, or I can't remember what it says, but it's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. So when it comes to dealing with feedback, Chris, what would you recommend that people keep in mind whilst they're giving feedback?
Well, I mean, the first thing is always to remember that you're writing to another human being, and by definition, Twisted 50 is for newer writers, so they may not be used to getting robust feedback. So, be lovely and gentle, and, tell them what really worked for you, as well as what might not have worked for you. I think if you can offer credible and reasonable, ideas, so not, I didn't like it set, in America. Could you put it on Mars? Like, that's, not going to work. So it's got to be, you got to stay within the realms of what they're trying to do, and help them achieve what they want to do, which is clear from what they've written. There's that. I would invite people, at the end, always say, I'd love to hear your feedback on my stories, which are, and then, if you've not been great, then they have an opportunity to reply, and hopefully they will be gracious in their reply. And something I said to Mark, a couple of months back, or maybe a month and a half ago, is also like, don't be over nice. Because I think all too often we all want to hear that it's really lovely, and maybe we have to start off with that, but don't say something you don't believe. I think perhaps is the best way to put it. And and like something I wrote in the article we put on Bang to Write is like, dear writers, please check your document before you send it, because Amy, who's in the room with us now, she's been helping out with Twisted 50, and she'd be the first person to tell you that it's kind of infuriating to have to put full stops at the end of sentences. Like, that's not even that weird time when the spell checker didn't figure it out. That's literally, you didn't pass it through a spell checker. You didn't pass it through anything. And that's frustrating when we have to correct the most basic of issues, and it kind of informs us that the writer isn't necessarily taking the whole process particularly seriously. So just make sure what you submit is correct. And on that note, I mean, we don't do this, but I know other competitions. I know several other people who run competitions, and they have a very, very strict policy. If you do not adhere to the guidelines, you're rejected immediately. And it's a way to just not waste time. We don't do that, but I would say 25% of the stories that we've had submitted, if we were strict about our guidelines, would be rejected. Simple, very, very simple things like sending things in the wrong format, or not putting your name on it, not naming the document correctly. What people don't realize is that we're dealing with potentially hundreds and hundreds of documents, and we don't know from reading it whether it's draft 1 or draft 2. If you've called it untitled document, and believe it or not, we've had stories submitted to us that are called untitled, that's the name of the document, then unless it's attached to another piece of data, we're going to struggle to know which is which. And that's why in other instances other competitions would reject it. We don't. But yeah, be diligent about following the rules. The rules are there to make the process work, not because we're rule people, whatever that even means.
Oh yeah, so true. As somebody who's worked on God knows how many contest schemes, initiatives, investment things, oh my God, the untitled document problem is just like unbelievable. It's just like, it's so hard to keep track of certain things, and people just don't name their files. It's just like, why?
Yeah.
So we've been talking for nearly 50 minutes now, Chris. So how about we finish with some tips for writing horror and dealing with feedback, anything that you can kind of think of. So my first idea for offering feedback, for example, would be try and frame it as a question. I always think that kind of keeps us away from judgments and making people feel bad or making people defensive, things like that, you know, rather than saying I didn't like it when this character did this thing, say why did this character do this thing? I didn't understand why they did at this point, and that kind of changes the whole tone of the feedback. So asking questions, I think, is a good tip. Do you have any other tips for feedback?
Yeah, I mean, get on Spotify and listen to some really cool horror movie soundtracks when you're writing. Because horror movie music is very, very evocative of the genre, and it immediately shifts your subconscious into a different place. So I always like to, when I'm writing darker stuff, I always listen to darker stuff. I mean, occasionally even like death metal, very loud. Not that that's anybody else. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, create the environment for you to go to the dark place. And like I said earlier, I think the biggest thing is to be unafraid of writing. Be unafraid of judgment, not from a like people say your writing isn't very good, but what you've actually written feels wrong, like you should go to prison for it, then you're probably writing something that should be in the book. So yeah, like be within the limits of the law and pop culture taste. I don't know what that really means, and I don't want to provide any guidance for it. But I think we all kind of know there's some things you can't or we should not do. And so obviously don't go there. And then be massively imaginative and write from that. Like in one of the Twisted books, we had a story about somebody who was, the consciousness remained inside them after they became a decaying corpse. And it was just the thoughts of, the feeling of worms going into your body. And it was demented. And it wasn't really a story. It was just and now I'm rotting away kind of like vignette. So write a vignette if that works.
Definitely, I would agree with that. Actually, I had a story in Twisted 52, I think it was, volume 2, called Super Knits. And it was based on a dream I had, because all my children at the time had knits, and I had this dream, and so I just felt like I was just doing their hair constantly. Oh, it was so gross. Then I had this dream that I was still doing their hair, and then there was these massive knits in their hair that got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it started pulsating and started to like literally suck their brains out. And this was the dream. And then I woke up and I just went downstairs and I started writing it, and then I put it on Twisted 50 and really didn't like it. They were like, oh, I'm really itching. Oh my God, that's just so disgusting. Ugh. And even to this day, I can't read it without going, ugh. So sometimes it's about like what scares you or what disgusts you, or even just listen to your dreams, maybe.
Yeah. And leverage the, why not write a werewolf movie? Why not write a vampire movie? But ask, what would a werewolf do in 2024? Under Labour. I mean, it's a really weird juxtaposition. But that can often lead to a really interesting concept. It doesn't have to be howling at the moon. The practical realities of being a werewolf in 2024. So get imaginative.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies of the last like 10 or 15 years was a vampire movie called Daybreakers.
Yeah.
And in this particular story, pretty much everyone is a vampire now. It was a commentary on overpopulation of the planet. So they were like, they're running out of blood because they're running out of humans, because most people are vampires at this point. So what happens when they run out of blood? And I just thought that was a really great question. It was a really great way of saying, well, here's vampires. Vampires are everywhere. Also, humans are everywhere. Now, what would happen if vampires were overpopulating the planet? And it was just like, what a fantastic movie. I think it was an Australian movie. And it was really, really fun. And sometimes, playing around with the what ifs of things that we're really familiar with that are pre-sold, like vampires, like werewolves, like zombies, like knits. You know, what could take that to the next level somehow, I think. And it's really fun to really kind of go down that rabbit hole and kind of entertain these ridiculous questions, because they are ridiculous. And yet we find ourselves thinking them, so why not? Okay. So I think that's it from us this evening. Thank you so much for joining me, Chris Jones. Remember, if you want to get involved in Twisted 50, it's just www.twisted50.com. Have you got any last words? Sounds ominous.
Yeah, we got an Instagram, so follow us on Instagram if you can. We had our old Instagram hacked, so we're back down to some very, very small numbers. So yes, you can make a tangible difference to our Instagram account by following us. I think just the big note is, if you don't like horror, it doesn't matter. Write a horror story, get involved. That came out of Twisted 50 Volume 1, is a lot of people got involved who weren't necessarily in love with horror, but then discovered that they really enjoyed going to the dark place, and spending some time there. It's not like they were going to move there, but it was great to go have a creative holiday there. Write it, submit it, read some other stories, be part of it, come to the awards and the party, get your photo taken, put it up on social media, walk the red carpet like a rock star, because why not? And enjoy the whole shebang. It's £15 to enter, and it's, you know, a morning's worth of writing if you're quick, and maybe 2 hours of rewriting a couple of weeks later. So super easy, huge fun, big rewards. Yeah, that's me.